Welcome to the first Darbin Orvar podcast. This is Matt, and I'm with Linn.
Yes, this is Linn, and many of you may know me from my YouTube channel. I do a YouTube channel where I do DIY projects, and I'm here today with
My partner,
Matt. Yes.
So you can just call me Matt. I help in the background.
Yes.
And I'm often the gopher and assistant and
that's
like
all
that.
you do. You're the gopher. You're the
Exactly.
Yes, we work on the videos a lot in the background together, even though I'm always the one on screen.
I'm not allowed to be on
You're
screen.
not allowed to be on screen. Yeah. Well,
I get to dust things off,
and
I get to buy sandpaper.
And I get to boss you around.
You get to boss me around. Yes, that's how that works.
That's how that works. But anyway, I thought that when you do a podcast, it's like a whole different thing from doing video. Video works really well one-on-one. But podcast is really boring if you have a monologue, if you're just the one talking.
You could just put a mirror in front of you and talk to it, though. But I guess you didn't want to do. I'm better than a mirror.
But then, yeah, exactly. The mirror would only be good from my point of view, but yeah.
You could do different voices. But
I'm not very good at different voices. I'm terrible with accents too.
Yes.
I can't even
you
do
have a Swedish one.
I can't even do a proper Swedish accent.
No.
Like if I try to exaggerate my Swedish accent, I can't even do it.
We'll stick with the American accent.
We'll stick with the American Swedish accent.
Yes.
Yeah. It's actually kind of funny. Often when I look at videos from the past, and this could be like just a few months ago, I was like, oh my god, I have such a thick accent there. At least I don't sound like that anymore.
No, you've changed.
I've changed so much. But
it's
of course,
a Northwest accent.
It's a Northwest accent. Yeah. So the concept of starting a podcast. I mean, there's so many things that I really want to talk about, and that maybe aren't really like they don't really work in video in quite the same way. So I thought that the podcast, in that sense, would be really cool because it would kind of provide that space to go over things which are kind of hard to go over in video.
And hence our first topic, organization.
Organization.
It doesn't have to just be shop organization.
No, I mean that really applies to all aspects of life.
But
and
your latest video.
Yes. Well,
it's all about organization.
Yes.
And many of the videos really are.
Yes. Well, because that's really the fundamentals in many ways. When you're in a space, you want it to be clean and bright, and you want it to work for what you're doing.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean,
you don't want it dark and dusty and hard to find things. Although a lot of people like it that way because they seem to keep it that way.
The video you're referring to is the French cleat video.
Yes.
Yeah, and where I build a French cleat wall, and then various.
Although even the drill bit cabinet was very organization related.
That was a couple of months ago.
And that was a French cleat also.
Yeah, but the French cleat was kind of in the behind on the scenes on that one. Yeah. But this latest one was really more about completely organizing a wall and then making organizers for that wall, as well as making one big box full of little tiny boxes. That was a lot of cutting. And
there were some great suggestions about labeling those boxes. But
that seemed to be a very common comment in general.
But that's always fun to get people and see how they think about how things should be.
Yes.
A lot of people like to just put those mason jars full of screws under their cabinet and hot glue that top to them.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's an option. However, I always find that to be kind of tricky because sometimes it's really tricky to get these lids in. And imagine you have this jar full of screws, and then you do this fumbling with it.
I think what it is,
maybe you just did some finishing with the wax, and your hands are slippery.
But the person who sets that stuff up, they know what they're doing. It's anybody else who comes in their area and touches it. That's the problem. Like, when someone interferes with their setup.
What is this? Yeah. And you come and, can I? Yeah.
So I think often organization is very much related to that person. And if you interfere with it, that's the problem.
Well, okay.
So beware of someone else's organization system, right?
Well, I would say that is particularly true in a shop. Okay, because if you talk organization, that applies to so many aspects of your life and your home. I mean, that can be your kitchen or your closet or whatever. And while, you want to keep that nice, whatever. Shop is a different thing because it's a very personal space.
Well, the closet definitely isn't important though, comparatively.
The closet, I mean, I guess the end result of a closet is that you turn out all right.
You
look
dressed.
Good. You get dressed. That is fundamentally Whereas in the shop, ideally,
you're building something.
You create something, right?
It's much more interesting to actually organize for the purposes of production.
It is. I agree with that.
So that you look halfway decent to go to work. Especially if you end up going to work in the shop, because then it doesn't matter so much.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it is definitely the end result is different. And because of that, if somebody touches your things when you have them in a very particular way, that could be a problem.
I think often people who are artists and not woodworkers maybe are more, they want their stuff in their way.
Yeah, it's a particular personality type, would you say?
I would say so.
Yeah, I would say so too.
So,
who are a little more,
you got to know who not to mess with their stuff.
Some people you can mess with their stuff. They're fine. They don't mind.
Yeah. And then others,
people,
you can't.
You can't. They go crazy.
They go crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we both kind of fall into that.
You think we both fall into the crazy one?
So. A little crazy.
So what are you thinking about the general philosophy?
I think fundamentally the general philosophy is that you want a space that makes you act and behave and think in the most optimal way, where you can find your things and where it enables you to think about things because you see things. Your things aren't hidden away.
So you're in favor of the open view policy?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Because I am too.
Yeah. Sometimes you see people who do these homes and they have everything close behind.
Nooks and crannies, especially the kitchen when they hide lots of things in drawers.
Everything. And I can think sometimes that that sounds, maybe it's very restful. If you're working in other places, you come back home, you don't want to see anything. You just want to I
think the serious cook would disagree with that philosophy.
That's what I was going to get. That I think it's different if you're actually talking about creating anything. If you're just talking about existing, resting, this is your resting space after you come back home from doing other things out, and then when you come home, you don't want to see all these things. Then that's one thing. But when you actually want to, build or cook or sew or paint or create whatever, then it's very important that you see what you have to work with. Because otherwise, if you don't, you forget about it.
Well, it certainly would be a bad idea to hide all of your pantry items somewhere where you can't see how much flour you have.
Well, yes, obviously, and your spices. Because you open, especially if you're not following a recipe. And I hate following recipes.
Yeah.
Because then you're like, if you don't see, then, so if you're following a recipe, then you'll be like, okay, I need this and this and that, and you go looking for that. But if you're like, for today, I feel like cooking this, and you open the cupboard and look at my spices. It's very similar to the shop. It's like your wood supply. If you're like,
that's
okay. So
we were just talking about that. The whole idea of, do you have wood in various locations, or do you keep it in one location?
Yeah.
And I'm in favor of the one location concept.
I have to agree with you there, because when you have the wood all over the place, then it becomes confusing. You're not quite sure where things are. So if you have a little bit wood here and there, then when you're looking for something specific, it's very frustrating. Because you go all over the place.
Well, I guess if you have the luxury of a large lumber rack, you don't have that problem so much. But in a smaller shop, it is very difficult to know where to put everything.
Yeah.
Especially these little cutoffs that you want to keep that are nice wood.
Yeah, I know.
And then having all of them in one drawer makes it easier to actually know to go back to that drawer all the time. Instead of
whatever you're looking for will be there, no matter what.
Or what you're hoping to be there may be there.
Right.
Even if it's not.
Yeah. Well, storage of wood is, in general, a big problem for many, because it takes up a lot of space, first of all. You don't have a lot of space to begin with, especially plywood or something. Of course, I don't store plywood because there's, unless you have it for some particular reason.
I guess one of the big things everybody's storing lately is the x-carve.
Yeah, the x-carve.
And so I guess you ended up keeping it out.
Yeah. Well, that was really because there just really isn't a lot of options for that, unless you build a something to hide it in. You put it under something.
Well, a few people have. They've built cabinets that can, or tables that can fold down,
or that move.
And they can kind of be wheeled out of the way.
Okay, I can see the practical aspects of that, but at the same time, it goes against the philosophy of having things accessible and seeing what you have. I think. Because if you do that,
well, it's kind of like, do you ever fold away your table saw?
I know, that's ridiculous.
Yeah,
I know.
And
okay, so because if you're doing I realize that lots of people deal with small shops, and my shop is very small as well. But if you do that, then by definition, you are not planning on using it very much. You're just planning on having it around for the one day you might use it.
Yeah, I think the problem is that you don't become dependent on using it, so your ideas don't flow towards that device, that tool.
Yeah, that's true.
It's like if you put away your table saw all the time, you would be less inclined to actually get it out.
Yeah, if anything is cumbersome to get to, if your bandsaw is very difficult to get going, if you have stuff all over the place, then you're just not going to use it.
So I think the basic philosophy is keep the tools out.
Yes.
Otherwise, you're not going to use it.
Yeah. Although that is an interesting point as well, because do you keep everything out, and do you use everything?
I think you basically say you keep the bandsaw out, you keep the table saw out, you keep the miter saw out. Those kind of things
but
definitely stay out.
The dovetail saw out if you never do dovetails. But
no, then you shouldn't have a dovetail saw if you never do dovetails.
What if you have the inspiration of one day doing dovetails, and you're like, I'm going to be the kind of woodworker who does dovetails?
Well, that day will change you, and you will get rid of something else and put this one out.
Well, that is also the benefit in many ways of a small space. It really forces you to choose what it is that you want to focus on and do, just because there isn't enough space to have everything and anything.
Well, it's very good, I think, not to have too much space, because if you have too much, you're going to waste it.
Right. I know, and it is interesting because that applies in so many levels. There's been a whole movement of like the minimal wardrobe that I've been reading about, where
yes, with the like 10 outfits
exactly,
or whatever.
where they pick out, okay, these are my 10 outfits for the next month or two.
Yeah, that was a New York Times thing.
Oh, really? I didn't even see that. I was reading it on a couple of blogs, and they actually hide away all their other clothes. Like they're not allowed to go near them, and then it just becomes they don't have to think about it. Yeah. And in the same way, like if somebody gives you a bag of groceries with a chicken and broccoli and a couple of vegetables, then it's much easier for you to think about things to do with that than if you have like a whole, restaurant, kitchen, use whatever you want.
You definitely must be hungry. You're talking about food quite a bit.
I know.
I guess in the same way the x-carve is a pretty interesting example of, if you have it in front of you and you begin to use it, you're going to use it more.
Yeah, that's the thing.
If you put energy into it, for many people, the getting it has been fun and it's a toy.
Right.
And it's Christmas morning opening that thing up and
so many
playing with it or whatever.
Putting it together.
But using it seriously is a couple steps down the road, and it takes more effort to actually use it seriously.
Yeah.
But when you do, you're going to look at things in a totally different way.
Right. You might use it for things that you weren't actually thinking about ahead of time.
Yeah, you just used it the other day for something kind of just a small little thing.
Yes, I'm actually okay. What I really love, the concept of the x-carve, I think is really cool to make things which would be very difficult to do otherwise, that are intricate, are precise. And I just used it to create like a handle for the jig, for the box joint jig.
And that was a perfect use of it.
It was really perfect use of it, because that particular shape would have been very difficult to do in other ways. And of course, I guess you could have drilled holes and used a jigsaw, or I don't have a scroll saw, but it would have just been more cumbersome. So now it turned out so good. It looks just awesome.
It's almost like I think the x-carve is really designed for people who that's their basic fundamental cutting tool.
Yeah, and that is interesting too, because there are like so many people who are like, do I need an x-carve? And many of those people are woodworkers. And many people who think that, they might I can just cut it on the bandsaw.
Well, they're right.
That's true.
Yeah, they would cut it a lot faster on the bandsaw too.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think in the long term, if you have that x-carve and you're using it as your main cutting tool, you're going to get really good with it.
Yeah, exactly. And you're going to think about things that you weren't thinking about before, because you now have that.
And you're thinking about things in parts a lot more because of especially if you have the smaller one like you do.
Yeah.
The part concept, where you build and design one part and then it integrates with another part you build and design, and it's much more organized in the way it's built and the way it's constructed.
Yeah.
Whereas on a bandsaw or something else, you're kind of doing it so fast, you're rough cutting it so much.
Right. Yeah. The precision just isn't there when you're doing it by hand.
And the organization for design isn't there.
How do you mean?
In the x-carve, you have to design each part.
Oh, yeah.
And then you have to save that file.
Right. So there's much more thinking ahead, much more planning. Yeah.
You can't play in the same way as with the bandsaw.
Exactly. Where you just go and get some wood and cut.
Which is both good and bad. It depends on what. But if you're in an apartment, you can't have a bandsaw.
Well, I mean, that is interesting. I mean, we've seen some videos where people who are not woodworkers, who are more into electronics and other things, who use this exclusively to
Winston
cut things.
Comes in mind. Winston Moy or something like that. I can't remember his name.
It's interesting. You follow so many channels tools, and then every once in a while these people pop up, and yeah, I remember he did something like that.
He's focusing on it as his main cutting tool.
Right. And in that sense,
yeah,
it's extremely useful.
It's much more important for the dust collection.
Right.
It's much more important for sound for him. All that kind of stuff. So yeah, what someone like that does with the X-carve, I think, is actually more interesting than what a woodworker's going to do.
Yes, because they have no. It's like being limited in what you can do.
That kind of pressure is such a great creativity booster.
Right.
If you just don't have any limits, then there's nothing creative there.
Yeah.
You know, if you just have the biggest shop and the biggest tools, then it's like you can just go from one to the other, and it really doesn't matter. But if you are focused on an apartment, or you have to be quieter or less dusty, you're gonna really come up with some more interesting stuff.
Necessity is the mother of invention, right?
Yes, exactly. And so I think it's in many ways it's kind of unfortunate that woodworkers are only, as far as we can tell, woodworkers seem to be getting the X-carve.
It seems to be a lot of focus on the woodworkers at the
But I'd really rather see some people who don't normally cut.
Yeah.
Like have their own bandsaws and table saws.
I mean, I can imagine if I got the X-carve when I was young in my room and I didn't have any woodworking tools, I would have thought it was the coolest thing ever. You know, to just play with all kinds of things. Well,
I think that's what the goal is. If you want to pursue, greater creativity with the X-carve and things like that, and intricacy with the designs, it's almost like you need that pressure, so you step away from the bandsaw more.
Yeah.
If you're relying on the large tools, then it's always going to be a little bit sloppier than the pre-design and execution with an X-carve or a 3D printer or something like that.
All of it, really,
Yeah, and it certainly is woodworking. Well, I saw the other day when you were working with the mahogany, when you were cutting out the handle with the X-carve. You had to plane that wood. There was a lot of work with that wood.
Unless you buy already, pre-surfaced wood. I mean, there's a lot of work that goes into preparing a piece.
Exactly, because it wasn't even on, so you had to deal with it.
And I think that many people probably neglected the design aspect in the first place.
As important.
As important. I mean, that is extremely important right there. The design aspect.
I think that's where you're going to see a whole new group of people who have become very creative with that design in the various.
I know.
Programs.
I can't wait to see what people are doing. I think it's going to be really interesting.
Well, right now everybody seems to be carving.
Yeah.
Carving, but
carving. Yes, carving is the name of the game.
Well, I guess that's the easiest thing to do with it.
And it makes sense. I mean, it's fun. It's like candy. It's like going into the candy store and you're like, I want the most colorful, most sweet things, and that's what carving is. It's fun.
It's really cool.
It's immediate.
Like for signs.
It's also for like presents and gifts. You want to add a personal touch, or you want to sell signs, or add a logo to your product or something.
I don't think so. I don't think that kind of sign carving though is going to draw in a lot of
innovation.
It's really difficult to do that. So I guess the bottom line is that the X-carve and organization go together in the sense that you need to see it, and it needs to be in your way.
Accessible, exactly. You need to be,
for you to use it.
Yeah. So I guess another thing too is it's important to know what you have, and that is especially true for wood, for finishing products and things like that. So I think it's important to take like inventory often, to reorganize things, to be aware of what you have, because it's really easy to just kind of push things in the back and forget about things. And if you take inventory, if you go over what you have, then you are constantly reorganizing in a sense and making your shop or your workspace fit better for whatever it is that you're doing.
Or you tell them about I think more importantly is when you're not realizing you have a tool that would do something, and you're trying to go figure out how to do this because in the drawer is sitting some router or something like that would do that. You just forgot about it. So
that happens often. You're like, I completely forgot about this tool, and that would have been really great for this thing that I was trying to do.
Exactly. The Dremel's like that a lot. That
Dremel.
Stupid Dremel, it just hides, and you need to get it out more almost,
right.
So that you actually
sometimes
can use it.
Often there are various ways to accomplish the same thing. So you might forget about something because there's another way to do it.
Okay, put it this way. Let's say you were to take the Dremel and you were going to do a project just with the Dremel.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then you begin to explore that device.
Well, there we have the limitations again.
And it's so important that you do place those limitations on things because otherwise you're not thinking as much.
Yeah.
You're not forcing yourself to think.
It's almost like, can you imagine if you were to play different simulations of society or something like that, where you put a certain tool in focus, and then everybody are forced to use that in a certain way. And how that would affect the outcome of innovation.
Well, I mean, isn't that true? I've heard numerous times now that you can't use dado stacks in Europe.
Oh.
And so in America, I'm not even sure about anywhere else, but in America, people, design jigs with dado stacks in mind, and they don't in Europe. So obviously the Europeans just do not know how to design dado stack jigs, right? Because they don't use them.
Yeah.
So yeah, what's available will determine what happens.
Exactly, that's the same for wood, for example. Like if you live in an area and you can only get dimensional lumber, you are not going to think about anything with hardwood. Another thing I was thinking about was the concept of the ultimate shop. So many people have this idea of they want a huge shop with all this machinery, and then of course there are several beautiful shops on YouTube, for example. Like Frank Howard has a gorgeous shop with lots of different things in it. 2 table saws and all of that.
I think 3 actually.
Was it 3?
Yeah,
maybe. And I guess what I'm thinking about that is I can definitely see that point. But I have pretty much 2 shops. I mean, I guess you can say, because there's the indoor shop, which is more of the x-carve, the finishing, computer work, tinkering, and then there's the outer shop, which is the carport. And there's the cutting tools there: miter saw, table saw, lathe. And
the dusty tools.
The dusty tools, exactly. And that is also, in a way, it has developed that way because of the structure, because the shop is pretty small, the indoor shop is pretty small, and it's hard to really cram a lot of tools in there and make it functional and useful while keeping it nice and neat and clean and, a nice environment to spend time in.
And that's another point, is that you want to spend time in there beyond just kind of woodworking.
Yes. I want it to be this kind of place where I constantly hang out and work, but also relax.
There was a great shop. It was an episode of This Old House a couple years ago.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Where it was a New Orleans, and
yes, I think it was New Orleans. Yeah.
The guy had like a 5,000 square foot building. Half of it was a shop, and half of it was like, I think it was a different kind of shop, like more of a finishing shop.
It was like an old factory.
Yeah.
That he bought. What I really liked about that one was that it was like he had basically several shops within the one shop.
Yeah.
And he had them blocked by glass, kind of like the foreman is looking at the factory.
Yeah.
It
was like an office of glass.
Right. Within, so you could see the other parts, but it was separated.
Well, then the actual shop was completely separated too.
Right.
Half the building.
That was gorgeous.
Yeah.
But
I think he built doors. He restored doors, built doors and windows, things like that.
Yeah. But that seems pretty ideal to me. Okay, so initially, the whole 2 shops concept just kind of developed over time, and it wasn't like a conscious decision.
Well, you had one shop at first.
Yeah, I had one
shop. It was just outdoor.
Yeah, exactly. It was just the outdoor shop, and it was pretty cold and damp and rainy at some points. And,
definitely. The glue took 3 days to dry.
Yeah, the glue took 3 days to dry.
Yeah.
And not to mention, it's just not very inviting to go out there when it's cold and wet. And
it is pretty wet here
in Oregon.
In December and January. Very
we're in
wet.
the summer right now, and the summer is gorgeous, but
very dry in the summer.
No rain. But then in the winter, it's
pretty wet.
It's pretty wet. So so it wasn't the greatest, but then the whole concept of 2 shops just kind of developed over time. But now, after having dealt with that, I must say I love that. I think I would replicate that in a bigger situation.
Well, I think the whole point is that you have to focus less on noise and dust collection when you have them separated.
Right. And I think sometimes it's just nice to have 2 different spaces to spend time in. That you're not just crammed in the same space, constantly.
Well, I mean, granted, it could be in one nice room that you block off into 2.
Right.
Or,
I think that goes back to creating zones in general. And that goes back to organization, because you really want to create useful areas for different types of things, where it becomes very easy to do certain things in any one area. So in the shop, for example, the indoor shop, there are several zones. There's the workshop zone, there's the computer area, there's the organization wall where the drill press is, and there's the tinker table where the drawers have the Raspberry Pi and wires and things like that. And the main concept behind that is creating areas that makes it inviting and easy to perform those specific tasks. So I do very much believe that in order to have an organized space, it's useful to kind of carve out areas for those different tasks.
And I think you've carved out just about as much as you can carve out of that shop.
It is packed, isn't it?
It is packed, and each zone is relatively small.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's another thing. You don't have to have a lot of space in order to do that.
So what is that? How many zones is that?
Okay, so I got the computer, the workbench, the drill press area with the wall.
Organization area.
Yeah, exactly. It's organization. Then there's the tinker table. Oh, and then there's the x-carve table too. So that's 5. 5 right
so
there.
In that small shop, you got 5 different zones where you can get stuff done that's really separate from other stuff.
Exactly. And it's not like they're it's not like they're closed off with you don't have to create closure on the zones. You don't need like
so basically
walls
you
behind
have
them.
three desks in that place.
Yeah.
That's pretty. So you could have 3 workers if you have.
You could have, yeah.
You could stand there at the bench, and you could be a teacher or a lecturer or whatever, and you could have 3 students at desks, or workers if you had.
Right. Another concept that I think is rather important is to not get everything done at once. Don't do everything overnight.
You mean if you won the lottery and you were going to build the biggest shop you could do?
Exactly. Okay. Listen, you just got tons of money, and you're like, I'm going to build the biggest, best shop ever.
Yeah.
Don't.
So don't do that. Don't do that in a weekend.
Don't do that in a weekend. It's almost like these HGTV shows where they come in and they transform a family's home overnight.
Or
and
they
get to move in.
They transform the backyard secretly in a day or something, and then you have no idea. Yeah. And you didn't get any input on that either.
No, exactly. Yeah. You're just hoping that you're gonna like it. But things take time to kind of develop. You can't just
look at your shop. It started off as one way, and you know what? You didn't push it, so you didn't try to get the whole thing
because
designed.
You never know what directions you're gonna go in, what you're gonna want to focus more on, and also just what fits each space best. And there's a lot of factors that go into that. The lighting, where things fit to
lighting is a perfect example of how you've changed that quite a bit.
Yeah,
and you're into that right now. I was
just thinking of it, like you really can't put enough lighting into that space, especially when you do filming. It's like there are always corners that are dark.
I think though the issue is that you don't want to get caught up getting sucked down too much in one type of lighting that you can't change it.
Yeah.
Because that's the whole idea, is that you've been adapting more light. But if you had really big, fluorescent ballasts, that would have just been difficult to upgrade.
Right. And that makes it very difficult for the zone concept too.
Yeah.
Because very much the zone concept is very much related to lighting.
And so you do. Yeah, that's right. In the shop you have zones. Every zone has different lighting.
Right. And that really helps define the zone as well, make it feel more intimate.
Yeah. Because for filming, you don't keep them all on because you're not filming every zone.
Right. But then sometimes, you might keep the big ones on even if I'm not filming, just because they provide so much light and they're very useful. But in general.
But now with the x-carve, you just have that one light above it.
Yeah.
And that's all that really is necessary because, you don't film that so much anyway.
Yeah. But back to the concept that things just take time to develop.
Yeah.
Things you don't figure out overnight where things fit. And
well, the tinker table certainly didn't fit overnight. That was something where the piece of wood was from last year.
Yeah.
And it finally got transformed into a table.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. The tinker table is actually a good point because the top has mahogany, and I bought that mahogany piece like way before actually building the table, not really knowing exactly how I was gonna deal with that. But it's just kind of something. I think exactly. I think that's the same for furniture and projects. Often, some things just take time to develop in that sense too. You don't want to rush things all the time. Just like organization, just like moving into a space. You don't want to like cram it full of stuff right at once.
Well, I think a lot of people don't care that much about
organization.
Well, they like organization and they think if somebody else does all of it that it is organized. But then they don't know where anything is.
Exactly. I think that's actually a good point because if you are not actively involved in your space, if you don't touch things and move things and know where things are, then you are not close to them.
It's not your space.
It's not your space.
Yeah. Well, that's why you're constantly organizing that shop.
Yeah.
Because it becomes every day it becomes more your shop.
Yeah.
You put things because you don't know where initially you'd want that, the French cleat wall or something.
No.
Because it took a lot of time to develop that.
Yeah, because many other things had to happen before that could happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the right order of things.
The right order of things, exactly.
And you just can't rush that order.
No.
Because you don't know how you're going to behave over time.
Yeah, exactly. You don't know what you're going to get into, what's going to get less focus on or whatever. Yeah, and then something like the x-carve or something like
pops
in, and you did not plan for it.
Definitely not.
And it's big, and you have to deal with it.
And that brings another thing. people getting the 1 square meter
Why are
x-carves?
people getting the big one? I mean, unless people are just like, oh my god, I can get something, I might as well get the big one. But it's so big.
Well, I think people have this idea that they're going to use it for some kind of
like
grand
projects,
or maybe skateboard,
or big signs.
Well, yeah, I guess.
But I guess what I'm thinking about using it for is more smaller parts to build different things, and for that sense, the small one is fine. I mean, it's the best for that, really.
Yeah, I think that everybody is choosing this large one. Right?
I know, and I find it very surprising.
Yeah. It's that's 4 times the size of the small one.
Yeah.
The board.
Yeah.
That's really big, 4 times.
Yeah.
I mean, granted, not everybody has a small space like you do, but still.
Another thing that I was just thinking about, how, I guess the goal in many ways is to have an uncluttered space where you know where things are, but it's not a mess. And that very much relates to how that reflects how you think and how you feel. That an uncluttered space is an uncluttered mind.
Well, I guess the one thing you can think about is that apparently not everybody agrees with this concept because a lot of people have dark spaces, they have, cluttered spaces, they have dusty spaces. And it's pretty much like you're thinking from the point of view that everybody would agree with you, but they do not.
they might in theory, but not in reality.
Exactly. That's the Kant's categorical imperative. The idea that if you think something, everybody else should think it too.
Right.
So, yeah, they don't. They don't, though. Everybody has their own way about things, and they do. And you're talking about from your point of view.
That's true.
And basically, when you look at if someone watches one of the videos and sees your shop, well, that's pretty much what you think everybody else's shop should look like too.
That's what
and
everybody.
It's kind of funny.
Everybody inherently thinks that whatever they do, everybody else should do too.
Well, that's why that's why Kant thought of it.
Yeah.
So basically, if you see a white shop or white painted walls. You pretty much think everybody else should probably paint their walls too. But nobody really does. Very few people do.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Well, I mean, the reason why I really like the white walls too, in addition to just being nice and bright, is for filming. I mean, it's just, you can't beat it for filming just because it makes everything brighter.
Seemingly as logical as that is, most of the people don't paint it white, though.
Most people who film, have often OSB on the wall, plywood, just dark kind of woody.
And paint is really cheap.
Yeah.
Or
it makes a huge difference.
You know what? There seems to be something that people just don't like paint that much, though.
It does seem to be
I don't really get that personally. But, most houses are painted. You don't really see too many houses that are not painted.
Paint is so awesome.
Cars are painted. They're not metal. They're not just metal color. It's amazing.
Well, paint does an awesome job to protect things.
And it looks good.
It looks good.
It's a good contrast.
Well, exactly. I think it's just awesome because it shows off other things. So if you build something beautiful out of wood, you want actually that to show, and not.
Granted, when OSB is not one of those things you want to show. It's like if you built a box out of OSB, you'd probably paint it.
Yeah.
But if you build your shop out of OSB, you leave it OSB. That's kind of weird.
Yeah, just
I don't get that.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting what you focus your attention on, because you might focus your attention for a long time building this beautiful little box out of mahogany or something or walnut, and you on every single little detail, and it's it's a fun project.
Well, that's because you also took the time to try to get the grain nicely, and so of course you don't want to paint something like that.
Yeah. No. I just mean that you put so much effort and focus onto that little box and every single little detail, whereas your shop, which you spend time in all the time, it kind of got neglected.
Well, I think that's the other thing is that a lot of people have garages or basements, and it's very difficult to spend as much time in that shop as you do.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
You're in that thing all the time.
Yep. It's my home.
Yeah.
My home.
And that's why you might as well make it really nice.
Yeah, like with curtains, for example.
Exactly.
Yeah, which a lot of people are like funny about. They're like, "Oh, you're a girl, so that's why you have curtains." That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. Yeah. Especially since it's about privacy.
Well, it's also you made those things really interesting too. Those are drop cloths.
Those are drop cloths, exactly.
And they actually have sound and insulation. Well, that was
the thing too. Really wanted to.
They cut drafts and all that.
Yeah. Because I was like, what can I use for curtains that is really durable and sturdy and cheap? So and then I was like, hey, look at all this drop cloth I have. That would be awesome.
It is a great source of that type of material.
Yeah. Because it's actually cheaper to buy that at Home Depot as opposed to going to the fabric store and buying the same kind of canvas. It gets more expensive.
That's pretty thick stuff.
It is pretty thick stuff.
Yeah. And I think it looks awesome.
Me too. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you're going to be in there a lot of time. You should make it nice.
Yeah.
There's no reason to have it.
Put molding around the windows and the doors.
Well, that was also an opportunity to see how cheap you could do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, because that was that really, really cheap white wood.
Yeah.
Really garbage wood.
Right.
But painted, it looks good.
With paint is the magic solution to pretty much everything. Paint and caulk.
Yeah, paint and caulk. And that's what the houses are structured by. Paint and caulk. They keep the whole thing together.
I was thinking about that before. Like, what people do before there was caulk. I mean, I just like caulk is so wonderful, especially if you are remodeling, especially remodeling an old house. It just hides everything. And I just find it amazing. Like, what did people do before the age of caulk? They make their own caulk? I don't know. I guess one thing about this whole letting the space develop over time is very much related to not being afraid of making changes.
It's your space.
It is your space.
I
think that a lot of people are afraid of touching things. They're afraid of really taking things down and changing things. And it is your space, and in order for your space to be useful, it needs to grow with you.
Most people, I don't see them changing their space too much.
Yeah. Well, and that's also because some people just don't change what they do or what they think and what they're into.
Well, I don't know. I mean, a lot of this, every time someone does an organization project or a shop project, they are changing their space, though.
Yeah.
So, there is examples of that.
Right.
Maybe if you are doing this a really, really long time and you're 20 years down the road or whatever, by then you probably have developed a pretty stable structure and you're not going to be changing it all the time.
Yeah.
You're not going to be, how many drill bit cabinets are you going to design over the years?
That is an issue. There's so many times you can make one thing.
Yeah. Well, which is good because that's how you know you're getting good. You're stabilizing and you're not changing constantly.
Right.
But in the early days, you shouldn't plan too hard.
Yeah.
Because you're going to be disappointed when something has to be changed if you put so much effort into getting it in that one way.
Yeah.
So be flexible. Initially, basically, don't try to get everything done all at once.
Yeah. Right. And don't be afraid of changing things if one thing doesn't work out.
Yeah.
Like,
don't let it linger.
Exactly. Don't let tools that you don't use, but that you are hopeful that one day you will use, don't keep those in your prime real estate on your wall.
How many people have bought, a fancy Lee Nielsen dovetail saw or something and then never used it?
Never used it.
Well,
and
you know what? Sell it. Sell it.
Yeah.
You don't need it.
Don't linger.
Yeah. Everybody always has a story about their tool that they bought that they don't use. Usually it's a dovetail jig.
Right. So usually it's something fancy. It's
Yeah. Or, early on you bought a miter saw and now you never use it because you have this fancy crosscut sled or something like that. Yeah. Okay. Well, then get rid of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Whenever you buy things like that, you have to basically get ready to get rid of it no matter what it is because everybody has a pretty small shop.
Yeah.
No one has like too big of a shop.
I don't think that exists.
No, not really.
Yeah. And I think that it's interesting too because that applies no matter what the value of that is. Some may hold on to something longer because they paid more money for it originally.
Yeah.
Or just because they think it's nice or pretty or whatever.
So what tools have you felt this way about?
Well, I guess I would say that it hasn't really been too much of a problem for me. I think in some ways because I did not go out and just like buy a whole bunch of tools at once. I didn't go out and buy a kit or buy things like that. I really bought things as I needed them. As I had a project in mind.
You mean the person who goes out and basically buys a table saw and a miter saw and
I'm going to get into woodworking.
All on the same day.
Right.
Then, well, obviously that's usually a problem.
And I guess, I never bought like a fancy dovetail saw before getting into dovetails, or it's like just bought things as you need them, as you're working, on a project.
So you don't believe in aspirational tools?
No, actually, I don't at all.
Okay.
And that kind of brings us a little bit to the point of what you need. Like, are expensive tools important in general? And I would say that no. I think that the most important thing is to always just get started with and work with whatever you have. And expensive things can get in the way of that sometimes.
Well, I guess the bottom line is that if you want to have a pretty cool organization, you pretty much just need a table saw.
Yeah.
Because with that, you can build all this other kind of stuff and go slow, and you don't need to waste space.
Yeah.
Okay, so what if someone just wants to get a bunch of storage solutions, so they go to the dollar store and they get a bunch of plastic bins?
Okay, I mean, I can see the point in that in some ways. It makes sense. It's practical. You need something to store things.
Hey, what if they're flexible about their organization and they're willing to get rid of that at some point in the future?
Well, if you put it that way, then I think maybe that's not a bad idea. However, it's actually going over that threshold when that time comes. It's almost like you don't want to sacrifice your environment for the sake of solutions.
Okay, and you mean the plastic bins
Yes.
may be a sacrificing of your environment?
And you might see them initially, but then you become used to things.
Well, isn't that the way you should look at it? Like if you want to be, especially if you want to become a woodworker, well, you might as well make all your stuff.
Exactly.
To store your stuff.
Exactly, that's a perfect thing to
instead of buying plastic cases that you eventually want to get rid of anyway.
Okay. So that brings me to the point of it's actually a good thing to suffer a little bit.
Yeah.
Don't expect things to be nice right at once. If you suffer and things are messy, then you're very motivated to do something. If you're keeping all your screws and nails in plastic bags and you can't find them, you're like, I can never find what I'm looking for. I still need to build this box. You're going to be so much more motivated to go out and do that than if you had just gone to the dollar store and bought some plastic things and you're like, okay, I found it. And it's not going to annoy you. It's important that things annoy you.
What is being a woodworker, that you design your own stuff.
Yes.
That you build your own
because
stuff.
that's what definition what makes it your space.
Yeah. And getting something from China that's plasticky garbage is not your space.
Yeah, right.
That's somebody else's space.
Right.
You know?
Right, make everything yours.
Well, I mean, there is the ability that if you can't build that kind of stuff, because if you don't have a shop, or if you have a kind of a
that's
whatever,
different.
Then you might as well use it and make it yours in some other way, like paint it.
Right,
paint
exactly.
The plastic.
You can change it. You can
spray
make
paint
it. Right. Yeah.
You can certainly do it somehow nice, or somehow make it yours.
Right.
Which is all that really matters.
Yeah, I agree.
Like if you're a woodworker, you might as well build it yourself.
And that's good practice too, because nobody's gonna
no one's gonna criticize your joinery.
You're not gonna give it away or sell it. You know.
Yeah.
It's a perfect place to practice different joints or whatever.
Exactly. And a lot of people were noting how many boxes you made and how they don't have the patience or they would never do that. Well, I think that's the whole thing, is that you take your time.
Yeah.
Don't rush. Right. You don't have to do it in a day.
Exactly. You don't. And if anybody is actually I wore a lot of different outfits in that video, just also because it wasn't done in one day.
No.
I mean.
No, you were cutting boxes for a week.
If not more.
You're not constantly though.
Exactly.
But
you do a little bit at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't take that long.
Right. And glue up too. It took a while.
Glue up is almost just as long. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then sanding and then all that nonsense.
Right.
But the bottom line is you don't have to do it anymore.
No, exactly. It's done.
And you got,
and it's beautiful.
And it's yours.
Yeah.
You didn't buy it.
Yeah. So. And now I think I'd like to make some more in other areas because it's just so nice.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Well, I remember the original idea was for the screws, you were going to put them under the cabinetry at first in the larger boxes.
Yes, actually, I started doing that I don't know, in the winter.
Yes, at least 6 months ago. More.
Okay, so where the counter is, where the wall with the tools are, I started just for fun to kind of with hand tools to do box joint. I think I did a dovetail box too, and I was going to make those a little bit bigger than the ones that I made in the video, but and kind of slide them underneath the shelves to kind of create the system. And I thought, that'd be beautiful to have a whole bunch of them over time.
Yeah.
But then
it didn't hold enough.
First
you couldn't have built that many.
You needed so many boxes.
Yeah. Otherwise, it would take up all the counter space too.
Exactly. That's the thing. You want counter space to be open. You don't want counters to be stuffed.
Yeah.
You want as many free, open surfaces to work on as possible, because it's easy enough to stuff them once you get working on things.
Well, I guess that goes into the basic concept that if you're hesitating on something, there's something wrong with it.
That's an excellent point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't want to just go down that road.
It applies to so many different things. Yeah. If something doesn't feel quite right about it, then
that happens often when,
I would say so.
And if it's not right,
there's a reason why it doesn't feel right.
Then you need to stop.
You need to stop and rethink, reevaluate, think how to do it differently.
And look, 6 months later, you might come up with a totally different idea.
And and it might take that long.
You have to be willing to let it go. That's right.
Of it taking that long. And I think that it's very much as similar as making a video. Sometimes I just can't quite figure out how to do it right. And it just doesn't feel quite right. The style of the video or whatever, the point. And then you just have to kind of let it go.
Well, I remember sometimes when you finish a video and then you look at the whole thing and then you have to scrap the whole thing.
Yeah, that has happened a couple of times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for no particular reason.
It just
because
annoys
it doesn't fit your standard or whatever.
Right.
And so, it takes a huge amount more time.
Right. And not to mention, you see things from a different point of view. Like if you make a video or if you build something, you think about your space, and then you step away from it for a second, after you've been working on it, then at that time will allow you to see things in a fresh way. Where when you're in the middle of something, it's hard to get a good perspective on things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just have to take something to its logical conclusion, even if it sucks.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything else you can think about talking about, or is that like the end of the organization?
I can't really think of anything.
Although I guess it never ends.
Yeah, that is another good point. It never does end. It's a constant, continuous process.
So are you thinking about doing a podcast every week, or what are you thinking?
I hate the concept of like a schedule every week like that, because then it becomes something that you have to do, and I just want to do it for fun.
Every other week, or just
maybe
just whenever.
Whenever.
You think you might not have a schedule at
first? I would like to aim for like every other week or so, or the funny thing is you get into like, oh my god, this is so much fun. I want to do more of these, and then other things get in between, and in that sense, it's really good to have a schedule to keep you on track. But at the same time, you don't want a schedule where like
schedules can be restricting too.
Yeah, I believe, they definitely can.
Especially with a large schedule of videos.
The schedule of videos is rather,
So schedule on top of schedules.
Schedule on top of schedules, yeah. So I want this to be fun. I don't want it to be like you have to do this. I want it to be fun.
Well, eventually.
Just
because something is fun doesn't mean it's not difficult.
No, that's true.
It's good to like your job, but it doesn't mean it's easy.
Yeah.
And this is definitely.
I feel like that about the videos a lot.
Yeah.
Like I love doing them like most of the time, but then sometimes it's like, oh, this feels like a job, just because like I have like a ton of editing to do.
It is a job.
It is a job. I mean, I know. Yeah.
You shouldn't shy away from that point.
It's a business.
It's definitely.
And we very much run it like a business. We plan ahead, and.
And so the podcast is both an outlet
and a business.
Well, it's an outlet for kind of just talking about things you can't fit into a video.
Yeah.
But it's also become something that people expect and they want to hear more, or they don't want to hear more.
We'll see about that. They're like, this doesn't know very good.
So I hope there's some comments. And
I would actually love that.
Input.
If you listen to this, just let us know what you are thinking. Did you like it? Was it interesting? Did you get anything out of it? And
if you'd rather hear Linn talk by herself, then
which could be, it would be less
interactive.
Good point. Good point. Less interactive. That's a good way of putting it.
So the mirror.
Hard to be interactive by yourself. The
mirror doesn't talk back.
No, it doesn't. Yeah. I guess that's about it.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.
Well, I'll see you guys soon.
See you soon.
Or talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Bye.